Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Jessica. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Yes? Okay, great. So happy to be here. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Paperless Post. I unfortunately do not have any more Jeff Bridges to show you, but I think we may have filled our quota for the evening. So Paperless Post, some of you said you've used the project, but I just want to give a high-level intro into what the product is. So Paperless Post helps people create custom online and paper stationery with our powerful design platform. But something we like to speak a little bit more about is just empowering people to make something beautiful. So similarly to Squarespace, we're a tool and a platform that allows people to create and design with templates. And I want to talk a little bit about who these people are that we're designing for and who these audiences are. So basically we have two audiences in Paperless Post. There's a group of senders and a group of receivers. Internal language, but basically you guys know you're sending or hosting a party. You're the one who's the instigator of the fun. And then there's the other people who are receiving it, and then hopefully you want them to do something like reply and say they're coming to your party. So to talk a little bit about these audiences, there's a couple of relationships. There's a one-to-one, so Valentine, or hopefully one-to-one, not one-to-many, but you have the one-to-one Valentine relationship. You're sending, you're receiving. And then there's something like a save the date or a wedding or a larger formal party where you get a one-to-many relationship. And so we start to think about what are the experiences that are different for those types of people, those types of parties, and how can we design against those. So show of hands, when you guys think of Paperless Post, how many of you think of invitations? You just raise your hand. Okay, great. How many of you think of cards, like birthday cards? Less people. Okay, great. How many of you think of photos? No people. Okay, that's what I expected. But I want to talk a little bit about why we spent a lot of time last year building a photos product, which some of you probably don't even know about. The reason we built a photos product, which is a way to take and share photos on Paperless Post, is that the hosts, the senders, asked us for it. They really wanted a way to create more of this reflection or remembering around their events on the platform they were already using. So they use Paperless Post because they want to have private social events. They're not going to Facebook. They are hosting their event on Paperless Post because they want to have a different type of experience, and they wanted to really have this photo sharing experience, so we built it. So if we think about the difference between the senders and receivers, it's actually a really large number. So we have 5 million senders and 65 million receivers. The difference is giant. There's a really small group of people sending out to a massive amount of other people, and we want to figure out how we can create just as great of an experience for those receivers as we can for the senders. And that's what I was just saying. So I'm actually on the feature team called the receiver team, which is thinking a lot about that problem, is how to capture that audience and really give them a great experience so they love our product and use it too. So our hypothesis was that if receivers love photos, because the host asked us to build them, then they will too eventually become senders. So business goals, thinking about ways to capture that audience, ways to build this engaging product, and see what happens. So we're thinking about receiver engagement here. So again, I mentioned a little bit, but I think when you're building a brand new feature, something that's a little bit different than your core product, you want to identify where you fit in to the rest of the photo products of the world, which is Flickr and Instagram and Dropbox and Facebook and everywhere else that everyone is always sharing photos. So we thought a little bit about our audiences, and we know that they're hosting private social events, whether that's 1 person, 5 people, 20 people. They are social, even though they're private. They are having offline events. They're going to parties. They're talking to each other. They're doing the same behaviors that they're doing in the real world and want to take those online. They're not necessarily storing them. So you think about personal, you think about a Dropbox account or something else. So we're just really identifying where does that fit in for our users. And then where does it fit in with the rest of the product? It's not an invitation, it's not a card, you're not necessarily creating something, you have to turn it on, where does that happen? You sort of start thinking about all these feature logistics and how do you build that into the rest of your product. And I'll just breeze through this. It's just even if you're thinking about wireframes or you're thinking about functionality, you sort of want to keep those main business goals in line. You want it to be engaging, you want it to be fun, you want people to love it. and you want to think about ways where you can continue to get the feature or continue to make it accessible across the product. So one of the ways in which it lives is it's like highly present on event pages, which again, some people don't really even know we have unless they're setting up major events where they get this whole event page, and it's sort of like a mini website for them to host and talk to their guests and do all these other things that you want to do around an event type. You actually have the photo experience itself, where you have baseline functionality of a grid view, a list view, adding, sharing, downloading, that kind of thing. And then thinking about all the ways in which you need to access it. Is it on the platforms, you know? Is it on the mobile web? Thinking about all those things. And then lastly, like, there are some offline functionalities that tend to become really important as you iterate on a product. Like, hosts want to talk to their guests. They want to say, like, hey, take photos at my event. That way they'll actually get the photos. If they don't ask, they're not going to get them. So you have to facilitate things like emails and notifications and give them messaging tools to like better their experience, and not because they probably would go offline out of your product to do it, like they're texting or they're emailing or they're just getting Dropbox files, but if you facilitate it, then they'll actually like further embrace the tools you set up for them. So that was sort of all last year. We worked on this photos product. We talked about receiver engagement. We looked at the numbers, and things were pretty great. But what we realized is that no matter how much activation or engagement you get around like a feature, we really wanted to think about how this singular feature fits into the rest of our experience. So photos is one part of Paperless Post. It's a very small part. You guys didn't even know it existed. So how is everybody else going to know it exists? So I've been taking a step back this year and thinking about the card, which is what you send or what you get in the email, and then thinking about all these other steps along the journey. So there's opening, there's checking your calendar to see if you're available to even go to this party. There's like stalking other guests and like seeing if your ex is going to be there, or like talking to the host and doing all this sort of psychological interest stuff at the stage before you even know if you're going. There's, that's the stalking. There's deciding. So this whole phase of like 5 steps that happen in a matter of minutes in your brain about whether or not you're going to a party. And then there's actually responding. And hopefully you do, because the hosts get mad if you don't. There's planning, there's anticipating, there's prep, there's all these things. Logistics are really hard. Then there's actually going to the event, and then there's photos. So there's all these things that happen on our product before you even get to the after step of like, maybe I took photos at this thing, and like, maybe now I'm interacting with Paperless Post, this very last step. So I think what we're starting to realize is not only should we focus on engagement along this one particular feature that we worked on last year, but we should really actually focus on this entire experience as ways to create great products and great features along the way, and then people will naturally turn into senders and like naturally use our product in other ways because they had such a great experience along this journey. So again, this whole thing makes up the receiver experience. So last year was really about engagement, and that was just a different approach that we had. It happened across all the feature teams, so it wasn't just the receiver team. It was talking about creation and designing and all these other things that are involved in the product. But it was heavy on engagement, and this year it's really on experience, and it's really on core product experience. So we're a 5-year-old company. We've built up a lot of code, a lot of legacy code. We're a Flash tool. We're rolling off of Flash, obviously. We are just doing all of these things that are really about core product focus and experience across the site, across all platforms for everyone. So sort of we're thinking about the basics of feature building, but also the basics of our product in general. Yeah, so you have to throw that in there because it's a lot of work. But yeah, that's it. If you guys have questions, please ask them. I have tote bags for those people who ask questions. That's it. Great.
Questions for me. So
yeah.
You built an entirely new feature in your existing product. What did you learn about driving engagement with the new feature, and how to get people to actually use it, come back, all that good stuff?
Okay, yeah. So what we learned is that it's actually a really psychological process, and it has to do with the relationship between the host and the guests. So if the host asks you to do something, like if your friend who has a party asks you to upload photos, you're going to do it because you're going to feel bad if you don't do it. So there's this actual like offline relationship that happens. And so what we realize is that if we create tools, so if we create in-app messaging tools, for example, that allow the host to schedule a message ahead of time to their guests asking them to upload photos, then those photo galleries are like 80% more active than when the host doesn't send a message. It's like drastically better engagement if you facilitate the communication between the people who are like trying to do the feature. That said, I think it's education from the front, what we call the front door. So from the entryway to the site, people have no idea that we have photos unless they get through the entire process of setting up their event, and then we say, do you want to add a photo gallery? So it's about positioning, and those are some of the things we're thinking about this year in terms of product in general. And we're working with an outside agency for product strategy too, to think about all these different product lines we have, because we also have like a paper line, for instance. We have flat printed and fine printed paper invitations, and a lot of people don't know that. They just think about us for our online product, which we started with 5 years ago. So I think it's a lot about product positioning, education, and facilitating behaviors that you notice, and that's a lot of internal data, watching how people do things, testing features, stuff like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So in terms of adding this new photo experience to Paperless Post, did you discover that was something that was necessary from the data that you acquired as a company, or did you discover it via user testing? And if so, the user testing, how was that conducted within the company?
Okay, so that's a great question. We did a lot of that internal, like, why are we building this process through surveys. So we talked to a lot of senders, we talked to a lot of creators about what they would want the most or what would be the most helpful to them and their whole event process, and we sort of landed on photos as the biggest opportunity because engagement was our goal. So we said, if engagement's our goal, and that's the tactic we're going to use to try to drive, create the receiver to sender loop, then we're going to focus on social engagement, which is risky because we're not inherently like a social product when you think about like likes, comment, tags of the world, which is what engagement is like bringing people back to your site more and more if you create this engagement product. And I think it could be successful, but and it is to an extent, but I think the broader focus needs to be on the whole product, and so that's why we're making this shift back. User testing is something that we've been doing on new features, and we're trying to ramp up more of that. Like, I'm leading a user research process right now for the receiver experience, like the journey I just showed you. We're going to be doing some qualitative research there to figure out what receivers actually want and need, because they don't talk to us. The only people that write in and complain and like ask us for things all the time are the people who are creating invitations, but the people that we are trying to build for don't talk to us, right? So we're trying to do more of that.
Yes, shout it out the back.
Yes, you mentioned your paper business, and which is illegitimate and you
Right.
you realized that people wanted physical examples of your product, and you launched that last year.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So what percentage of your business has that become, and how's that going? What have you learned from that process?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. Obviously, it sounds like a misnomer, paperless post with a paper line. It's really hard to communicate to people what the difference between online and paper is, for one. Like, they just don't know. It's going really well. It's a third of our business now. So it's giant revenue source. It's a whole team. And it's sort of this open question from a senior management position about like how we want to position our company, because there's so many things we could do with paper, right? We could like become a calendar company and give you whole wedding packages in a box and like do all of these things. It's just a different direction. We could also really merge the paper and the online experience, which we are actively trying to do. So if you create a paper invitation, you should have access to all of your online tools, but we don't make it easy for you to do that right now. It's like a very roundabout way of creating like your online package to go with your paper invitation. Yeah. Yeah, but what we do find is that people have a lot of different needs based on an event type. So for example, if you're hosting a wedding, you might want to send your save the date digitally because you're cost conscious there, but you still want to do a fine printed invitation. So there's ways for us to be present throughout the event life cycle that have been great, as paper is like a great resource for like the people who want the tradition, who want the physical good, that kind of stuff. Yep.
I think one more.
Okay.
This new photos feature, you see a lot of popularity around weddings and even enticing like wedding photographers to try to use this feature in creating photos and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question, if you didn't hear it, was with the photos feature, have we been like reaching out to photographers or other people to try to get more traction around the feature? We have not. It's something we talked about in the beginning, is if you have a wedding and you want your wedding photographer to be in charge of your feature, how would that work? Or like, how could we facilitate other people running your event other than the people who set it up? So a wedding is a great example because usually the bride isn't the one setting up the wedding, right? So it's like the mom or the wedding coordinator, and all these different people have to have permissions to your product, which is like a whole nother thing to talk about, which is allowing multiple users to affect the same event. But photos, I think right now it's interesting. Some of the event types we thought were going to be the most successful weren't. So birthday parties, we thought like all birthday parties are a good example of you know, where photos are going to occur. But what we found is that it's only like 1-year-old birthday parties have a lot of photos, and then after one they like drop off until you're 21 or something. You know what I mean? Like there's like a huge gap in what type of birthday parties have photos. So those are the kind of learnings that we're doing, and continue to iterate on the product while we do this sort of like overhaul on the experience itself.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.